I've always had this thing for forgotten places, those hidden corners of the world that once held life but now stand silently, shrouded in mystery. My name's Sophie Dubois, and I'm a photographer based in Lyon. You could say I have a bit of an obsession with capturing the beauty and decay, the stories that old, abandoned places whisper if you listen closely enough. So, when I heard about the mansion just outside the city, supposedly left untouched for over a century, my curiosity got the best of me. It sounded perfect for my next project, a place frozen in time, waiting to be rediscovered. The day I decided to visit, the sky was overcast, casting a dull gray light over everything, adding to the eerie vibe. As I drove out of the city, the landscape started to change, the modern buildings giving way to countryside and then to dense woods. The mansion was hidden deep within, almost as if it didn't want to be found. When I finally arrived, I was struck by its grandeur, despite the obvious signs of neglect. The windows were cracked, the walls overgrown with ivy, but you could still see the elegance it once had. It was like stepping into a ghostly past. I parked my car a little way off and walked the rest of the distance. Each step felt heavy, like I was crossing some invisible threshold into another world. The air around the mansion was thick, almost oppressive, and I could feel the weight of its history pressing down on me. As I stood at the entrance, I couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and unease. This place had secrets, I was sure of it. I could feel them lurking just beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. My fingers tingled with anticipation as I reached for my camera. Pushing open the heavy wooden door, I was greeted by the sound of creaking hinges, echoing through the empty halls. The inside was even more impressive than the exterior: faded wallpaper, chandeliers covered in cobwebs, and furniture draped in dusty sheets. Every corner of this mansion told a story, and I was eager to capture it all. But as I wandered from room to room, snapping photos, that feeling of unease only grew stronger. It was as if the mansion was watching me, waiting for me to find something it had kept hidden for years. The light filtering through the cracked windows was dim, but it was enough to see the layers of dust that coated everything. I found myself drawn to the upper floors, where the air was colder, the shadows longer. It was up there in the attic that I felt something shift, like the atmosphere had thickened, and the silence became more pronounced. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that something was lurking in the dark corners, watching my every move. But I was too captivated by the mansion's mysterious allure to leave just yet. When I finally reached the attic, it was like stepping into a time capsule. Old trunks, covered in dust, were stacked against the walls, and forgotten relics were scattered across the floor. I started to set up my equipment, but my attention was quickly drawn to a large, ornate chest hidden beneath a pile of old linens. It was out of place, too grand for the dusty surroundings, and something about it seemed off. The lock was intricate, almost as if it was meant to keep something inside, something that shouldn't be disturbed. But my curiosity got the better of me. What could be inside? I wondered, feeling a strange compulsion to find out. There was a sense of foreboding in the air, but I brushed it off. This was the kind of discovery that could make my project truly unique. I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the chest, feeling a cold draft pass through the attic. But the photographer in me was too intrigued to stop. Whatever was inside that chest, I was determined to find it. Little did I know, that decision would set off a chain of events that would change my life forever. The moment I set my sights on that chest, something deep inside me stirred a mix of excitement and dread. It was like finding buried treasure, but with a sinister edge. The chest was large, almost too big to have been carried up to the attic, with heavy brass handles and an ornate lock that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. As I knelt beside it, I noticed strange symbols etched into the metal, symbols that seemed to pulse with a hidden energy. I didn't recognize them, but they gave me an uneasy feeling, like they were meant to keep something at bay. My fingers traced the intricate patterns on the lock, and I could feel a chill run down my spine. It wasn't just the cold air in the attic, this was something more. The chest felt alive, almost as if it was waiting for someone to come along and open it. I knew I should leave it alone, walk away and never look back, but there was a voice in the back of my mind urging me to continue, telling me that this was a discovery worth making. So, I ignored the growing sense of dread and began searching for a way to unlock it. Hours passed as I rummaged through the attic, hoping to find a key or something that could open the chest. The attic was full of old, forgotten things, dusty books, broken furniture, and faded photographs. Everything seemed to be from another era, long before my time. I felt like an intruder, disturbing the ghosts of the past as I moved through their belongings. But I couldn't stop now. That chest had a hold on me, and I was determined to see what secrets it held. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I stumbled upon a small, tarnished key hidden inside a cracked drawer. It was almost as if the key had been waiting for me, tucked away in the shadows. My heart raced as I picked it up, the weight of it heavy in my hand. I knew that once I opened the chest, there would be no turning back. But curiosity had me in its grip, and I wasn't about to let go. I returned to the chest, my hands trembling slightly as I fit the key into the lock. The moment the key turned, I felt a shift in the air, a sudden drop in temperature that made my breath catch in my throat. The lock clicked open with a sound that echoed through the attic, almost as if it had been holding its breath for years, waiting for this moment. I hesitated, my hand on the lid, feeling the weight of what I was about to do. But there was no stopping now. I lifted the lid slowly, the creaking hinges sounding like a warning I was too stubborn to heed. Inside the chest was a collection of old, faded photographs, each one more disturbing than the last. They were black and white images, the kind you'd find in an antique shop, but these were different. The people in the photos looked haunted, their eyes dark and hollow, as if their souls had been trapped in the paper. Beneath the photographs, wrapped in a tattered cloth, was a small blackened doll. It was charred, as if it had been through a fire, and its eyes seemed to follow me as I held it up. A sudden wave of nausea hit me, and I realized that I had made a terrible mistake. Before I could react, a dark shadow began to rise from the chest, swirling around me like a storm. The temperature plummeted, and I could feel the icy grip of something malevolent closing in. The shadow enveloped me, its cold presence seeping into my bones, and I knew without a doubt that I had unleashed something evil. My instincts screamed at me to run, to get out of that attic before it was too late. Dropping the doll, I bolted for the door, the shadow chasing me down the stairs, its whispers echoing in my ears. I didn't stop running until I was outside, the mansion's ominous silhouette looming behind me like a dark memory I couldn't shake. My breath came in ragged gasps, and I could still feel the icy grip of that shadow clinging to me. It was as if the cold had seeped into my very soul, leaving me trembling and terrified. I had no idea what I had unleashed, but I knew one thing for certain: I needed to get far away from that place. The thought of going back inside to retrieve my equipment was out of the question. My instincts told me that whatever I had awakened was better left undisturbed. I drove back to my apartment in Lyon in a daze, the events of the day replaying over and over in my mind. The photographs, the doll, that shadow, none of it made sense, and yet it was all too real. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white as I tried to calm myself down. But the unease wouldn't leave me. It clung to me like a second skin, a constant reminder of the mistake I had made. I tried to convince myself that it was all just my imagination, that I had let the creepy atmosphere of the mansion get to me. But deep down, I knew better. When I finally reached my apartment, I locked the door behind me, as if that simple act could keep the darkness at bay. I leaned against the door, closing my eyes and trying to steady my breathing. The familiar surroundings of my home brought a brief sense of comfort, but it was fleeting. Every shadow seemed darker, every creak of the floorboards louder. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was no longer alone, that something had followed me home from the mansion. The thought sent a chill down my spine, but I pushed it aside, telling myself I was being paranoid. I forced myself to go about my evening routine, trying to pretend that everything was normal. But as the hours passed, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see that dark shadow lurking in the corners of my apartment. I tried to distract myself by reviewing the photos I had taken earlier, hoping to find anything that would explain what had happened. But as I scrolled through the images, my heart sank. There it was in the background of almost every shot, a faint, dark blur, like a shadow that didn't belong. My hands trembled as I realized that the shadow had been there all along, watching me. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Whatever I had unleashed in that mansion had followed me home, and it was growing stronger. I could feel its presence more acutely now, a cold, oppressive weight that pressed down on me, making it hard to breathe. The lights in my apartment flickered, and I heard a faint whisper, so quiet that I couldn't make out the words. My heart raced, panic rising in my chest as the truth became impossible to ignore. I wasn't alone. The spirit was here, with me, and it wasn't going to leave. I spent the rest of the night on edge, every creak and groan of the apartment sending my heart into overdrive. Sleep was out of the question. I was too afraid of what might happen if I let my guard down. The hours dragged on, each one more tortuous than the last. I kept telling myself that there had to be a logical explanation, that I was just tired, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew the truth. The spirit was real, and it was here, in my home. And as the first light of dawn crept through the windows, I knew that this was only the beginning. Daylight did little to ease the growing sense of dread that had settled over me. The whispers that had haunted me through the night seemed to fade with the sunrise, but the oppressive feeling lingered, heavy and unrelenting. I spent the morning trying to go about my usual routine, but everything felt off. My movements were jittery, my thoughts scattered, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every shadow in my apartment seemed to stretch longer. Every corner felt like it was hiding something just out of sight. It was as if the spirit had seeped into every part of my life, tainting the familiar with an unseen menace. I tried to distract myself, burying my head in work, but even that offered no solace. As I reviewed the photographs from the mansion, that dark blur in the background of each image seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. The more I stared at it, the more it felt like it was staring back at me, almost daring me to uncover its secrets. The rational part of my mind screamed for me to delete the photos, to rid myself of any connection to that place, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. It was as if the spirit had woven itself into the very fabric of my thoughts, and I was helpless to resist its pull. As the day wore on, the whispers returned, faint at first, like a distant echo, but growing louder with each passing hour. They weren't words, not exactly, but more like a feeling, an insistent presence that pressed against my mind, relentless and unforgiving. It was as if the spirit was trying to communicate, to make me understand something that was beyond my comprehension. The air in my apartment grew colder, and I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, expecting to see that shadowy figure lurking just out of sight. But every time I turned around, there was nothing there, just the oppressive silence, thick with the weight of the unseen. By evening, the tension had become unbearable. The lights flickered ominously, casting eerie shadows on the walls, and I could feel the spirit's presence growing stronger, more insistent. It was no longer content to hide in the background. It wanted to be seen, to make its presence known. The whispers had grown louder, almost deafening, and I could feel the cold breath of the spirit on the back of my neck, sending shivers down my spine. Panic gripped me as I realized that this was no longer something I could ignore or brush off as a figment of my imagination. The spirit was here, in my home, and it was making its move. I tried to fight back, to push the presence away, but it was like trying to hold back the tide. The spirit was relentless, invading every part of my mind, twisting my thoughts, and filling me with a terror that I had never known before. My heart raced, and I felt like I was teetering on the edge of a precipice, about to fall into a darkness from which there would be no return. I could feel the spirit closing in, its cold fingers brushing against my skin, and I knew that if I didn't do something soon, it would consume me entirely. Desperation drove me to reach out for help, but who could I turn to? Who would believe me if I told them that I was being haunted by a spirit I had accidentally unleashed from a chest in an abandoned mansion? The very thought seemed absurd, and yet I knew it was true. The spirit was real, and it was growing stronger by the minute. I felt trapped, cornered in my own home, with no escape in sight. The walls seemed to close in around me, and I could feel the spirit's icy breath on my neck, whispering dark promises of what was to come. I knew that if I didn't find a way to stop it, I would be lost forever. With my nerves frayed and the spirit's presence growing more intense by the day, I knew I couldn't keep living like this. The fear was consuming me, making it impossible to think clearly. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. So, I decided to dig into the mansion's past, hoping to uncover something that could help me understand what I was dealing with. I had to know what I had unleashed, and more importantly, how to stop it. The mansion was old, and surely it had a history, one that might hold the key to ending this nightmare. I started by visiting the local library, poring over old records and newspaper clippings that might shed some light on the mansion's history. The deeper I dug, the more I uncovered a dark and twisted story. The mansion had once belonged to the Beaumont family, a wealthy and influential clan in Lyon. They were known for their lavish parties and their eccentric ways. But then, one day, they just vanished. No one knew what happened to them, and the mansion was abandoned, left to rot. But the whispers I heard from the few old-timers who remembered the family hinted at something far more sinister. Rumors had circulated for years about the youngest daughter, Isabel Beaumont. She was said to be a strange child, with a fascination for the occult. Some claimed she practiced dark rituals, using the mansion's secluded location to hide her activities from prying eyes. The more I learned, the more I realized that Isabel wasn't just a curious young girl dabbling in the unknown. She was deeply involved in something dark, something dangerous. And it wasn't long before I found out that the chest I had opened had once belonged to her. The chest, as I discovered, was rumored to be a conduit to the spirit world. Isabel had used it in her rituals, and it was believed to be the key to her mysterious power. According to the stories, she had used the chest to trap spirits, binding them to her will. But something went wrong, and one of the spirits turned on her. The entire Beaumont family disappeared shortly afterward, their fate unknown, and the mansion was left abandoned. The locals whispered that the chest had been sealed for a reason, to keep the vengeful spirit from escaping. By opening it, I had set that spirit free. As I pieced together the story, a cold dread settled over me. I had awakened Isabel's spirit, and now it was seeking revenge on anyone who disturbed her rest. The photographs, the doll, the dark shadow, all of it made sense now. The spirit wasn't just haunting me, it was punishing me for what I had done. And I knew that if I didn't find a way to stop it, things would only get worse. The more I learned, the more I realized just how dangerous this spirit was. It was powerful, fueled by centuries of anger and betrayal, and it wouldn't stop until it had claimed its revenge. I felt a growing sense of urgency as the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. Time was running out, and the spirit's hold on me was tightening with each passing day. I needed to find a way to reverse what I had done, to seal the spirit back in the chest where it belonged. But how? The rituals Isabel had performed were lost to time, and there was no one left who knew how to stop her. I felt like I was fighting a losing battle, but I couldn't give up. I had to try, for my own sake, and for the sake of anyone else who might stumble upon that cursed mansion. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I would have to go back to the mansion. It was the last place I wanted to be, but I knew that the answers I sought could only be found there. The chest, the photographs, the doll, they were all connected, and somewhere in that decaying house, there had to be something that could help me put an end to this. My heart pounded in my chest as I prepared to return, knowing that this time I might not make it out alive. But I had no choice. The spirit was growing stronger, and if I didn't stop it soon, it would consume me completely. Returning to the mansion was the last thing I wanted to do, but I knew I had no choice. The spirit's grip on me had tightened to the point where I could barely sleep, barely think, without feeling its cold presence looming over me. The only hope I had of breaking free from this nightmare was to face it head on, to go back to where it all began. My hands shook as I packed up my gear, knowing full well that this time, it wouldn't just be about taking photos. This time, it would be about survival. The drive back to the mansion felt like a march to the gallows. Every mile brought me closer to the source of my terror, and my heart pounded with a mix of fear and determination. The sky was overcast, just like the day I first visited, casting everything in a muted, eerie light. As the mansion came into view, my stomach twisted into knots. The sight of that decaying structure filled me with a deep sense of dread, but I forced myself to keep going. I had come too far to turn back now. Stepping inside the mansion was like stepping into a different world, a world where the air was heavy with the weight of unseen eyes, watching, waiting. The cold hit me immediately, a sharp, biting chill that seeped into my bones. The mansion was silent, but it was the kind of silence that screamed. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind through the broken windows, felt like a warning. I knew the spirit was here, lurking in the shadows, and it was only a matter of time before it made its presence known. As I made my way back to the attic, the atmosphere grew more oppressive. The walls seemed to close in around me, and I could feel the spirit's cold breath on the back of my neck. My hands trembled as I climbed the stairs, each step echoing in the stillness. The attic door creaked open, revealing the same dusty, forgotten space where I had first discovered the chest. But this time, something was different. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel the spirit's anger radiating from every corner. It knew I was here, and it wasn't pleased. The chest sat in the center of the attic, just as I had left it, but now it felt like a trap, waiting to spring. My heart raced as I approached it, the weight of what I was about to do pressing down on me. The photographs, the doll, the shadow, they were all part of the puzzle, and I had to figure out how to piece them together before it was too late. But as I reached for the chest, a wave of nausea washed over me. The spirit was close, its presence suffocating, and I knew that this confrontation would not end without a fight. The shadows in the attic seemed to pulse with a life of their own, shifting and twisting as if they were alive. I could feel the spirit's fury, its desperation to break free from the prison I had inadvertently unlocked. My thoughts were jumbled, fear clouding my mind as I struggled to remember the steps I needed to take. The temperature dropped even further, and I could see my breath in the air, each exhale a visible reminder of the spirit's power. I was running out of time, and the spirit knew it. It was closing in, ready to claim its revenge. The attic felt like a battlefield, and I was caught in the middle of a war I didn't fully understand. The spirit's presence grew stronger, more tangible, and I could feel its icy fingers brushing against my skin. Panic surged through me, and for a moment, I was frozen, paralyzed by fear. But I couldn't let it win. I had to focus, to find the strength to fight back. The spirit wanted me to give in, to surrender, but I wasn't about to let it take me. Not without a fight. With my heart pounding in my chest, I knew I had to act fast. The spirit's grip on me was tightening, and the oppressive cold made it hard to think clearly. But I couldn't afford to hesitate. I had come too far to let fear paralyze me now. I took a deep breath, steadying my nerves, and began to recall the fragments of information I had uncovered about Isabelle Beaumont and her dark rituals. There had to be a way to reverse what I had done, to seal the spirit back in the chest where it belonged. I just had to figure it out before it was too late. As I knelt beside the chest, the weight of the situation bore down on me. The spirit was here, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. I could feel its presence, cold and malevolent, closing in on me from all sides. The photographs I had taken flashed through my mind, each one a grim reminder of the shadow that had been watching me from the start. But now, it wasn't just watching, it was ready to act. I knew I had to move quickly if I wanted to survive this encounter. The attic seemed to darken around me, the shadows deepening as the spirit's presence grew stronger. My hands trembled as I reached for the chest, the memory of the strange symbols on the lock flooding back to me. They weren't just decorative, they held power, a power that Isabel had harnessed in her rituals. If I could replicate the ritual, perhaps I could bind the spirit once more. But I had no idea how to do it, and every second that passed brought the spirit closer to its goal. The pressure was mounting, and I could feel my resolve wavering. I focused on the doll, charred and blackened, lying at the bottom of the chest. It had to be connected to the spirit, a conduit of some kind. I picked it up, the cold from the doll seeping into my skin, and I felt a jolt of fear. The spirit's anger surged, and the shadows in the attic began to writhe as if they were alive. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and I realized that the spirit was trying to communicate with me, to tell me something. But the words were garbled, lost in the darkness, and I struggled to make sense of them. My head throbbed with the effort, but I couldn't give up now. I placed the doll back in the chest, my hands shaking, and began to speak the only words that came to mind, words of protection, of banishment. They were clumsy, improvised, but they were all I had. The air around me seemed to crackle with energy, the tension so thick I could hardly breathe. The spirit fought back, its presence overwhelming, and I could feel its cold fingers closing around my throat. My vision blurred, and for a moment, I thought I was going to pass out. But I couldn't let that happen. I had to keep going, had to finish what I had started. Summoning every ounce of strength I had left, I slammed the lid of the chest shut and locked it with the key. The attic erupted in a blast of cold wind, and the shadows seemed to scream in fury. But then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the noise stopped. The air was still, the temperature slowly rising back to normal. I collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath, my heart racing. Had it worked? Had I finally sealed the spirit back inside the chest? The silence was deafening, and I could hardly believe that it was over. But as I stared at the chest, I knew that this victory had come at a great cost. The spirit might be contained, but its presence would haunt me for the rest of my life. With trembling hands, I stood up, my legs weak from the ordeal. The attic was still, the shadows no longer moving, and the oppressive weight that had hung over me was gone. But I knew I couldn't stay in that mansion any longer. I needed to leave, to get as far away from this cursed place as possible. I gathered my things, not bothering to look back as I made my way out of the mansion. The sun was setting as I stepped outside, casting long shadows across the ground. The mansion loomed behind me, a dark silhouette against the fading light. I knew I would never return, but the memory of what had happened would stay with me forever.